June 12, 1940. Republic Aviation Corporation, Farmingdale, Long Island. Alexander Kartveli stood before a room of skeptical Army Air Corps officials, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the rolled blueprints. The Georgian immigrant had just watched his carefully crafted XP-47 lightweight interceptor proposal crumble under the weight of European combat reports. The officials had been blunt. German fighters were tearing Allied aircraft apart over France and Britain. What America needed wasn't another delicate interceptor dancing around bombers at high altitude. They needed a destroyer, a bruiser capable of mixing it up with the Luftwaffe's best and surviving to tell about it. Kartveli's original design called for a modest fighter weighing 4,900 pounds, powered by an Allison V-17-10 liquid-cooled engine, and armed with just two 50-caliber machine guns. It was everything the pre-war Air Corps thought they wanted. Clean, efficient, and utterly inadequate for the war that was coming. What happened next would transform American fighter aviation forever. Within hours of that rejection, Kartveli began sketching a design so audacious, so massive, that his own colleagues questioned his sanity. The aircraft he conceived would weigh twice as much as anything currently flying. It would carry 8 machine guns when most fighters carried 2. It would be powered by the largest radial engine available, wrapped in armor plating thick enough to stop cannon shells. The impossible had become necessary, and necessity was about to birth a legend. The story of how one engineer's rejected lightweight fighter evolved into the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt is not merely a tale of technical innovation. It is a narrative of institutional adaptation under pressure, of immigrants proving their worth through pure engineering brilliance, and of American industrial might learning to build not just faster aircraft, but deadlier ones. The mathematics of survival were being rewritten in real time, calculated not in wind tunnel data, but in the smoking wreckage of aircraft shot down over European battlefields. Kartveli understood that everything the Air Corps thought they knew about fighter design was about to change. The elegant interceptor of peacetime doctrine would give way to something altogether more brutal, more American, more suited to the total war that was already consuming the world. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The path to that blueprint revision began thousands of miles away in a land that no longer existed. Alexander Kartveli was born in 1894 in Tbilisi, Georgia, then part of the Russian Empire. After the First World War, during which he was wounded serving as a Tsarist artillery officer, the young Georgian was sent by his government to study at the Paris Aviation Higher College of Engineering in France. When he graduated in 1922, Kartveli faced a choice that would shape the future of American aviation. The Democratic Republic of Georgia had fallen to the Red Army. The Bolsheviks controlled his homeland. Like his future colleague Alexander de Seversky, Kartveli chose exile over submission to the Soviet regime. He found work with Blériot Aéronautique in France until 1928, when opportunity called from across the Atlantic. The Fokker American company, headquartered in Passaic, New Jersey, needed experienced engineers to design aircraft for the growing American market. Kartveli emigrated to the United States, Americanized his name to Alexander Kartveli, and began learning the particular requirements of American military aviation. In 1931, he joined the Seversky Aircraft Company in Farmingdale, Long Island, as chief engineer. There, he met another Russian exile whose influence would prove crucial to everything that followed. Alexander de Seversky was already a legend in American aviation circles, a one-legged ace who had shot down 13 German aircraft during the First World War. Seversky had arrived in America in 1918 as part of a Russian naval mission. When the Bolshevik Revolution destroyed his world, Seversky remained in the United States, becoming an aeronautical engineer for the Army Air Corps and working closely with air power pioneer General Billy Mitchell. By 1931, when Kartveli joined his company, Seversky had established himself as one of America's most innovative aircraft designers. The Seversky Company's first success was the SEV-3 amphibian, an all-metal, low-wing monoplane that incorporated several revolutionary features. The aircraft's wing design featured elliptical curves on all flight surfaces, a configuration that would prove crucial to the P-47's development. More importantly, it demonstrated Seversky's willingness to challenge conventional design wisdom. In 1934, the SEV-3 was modified into a trainer configuration, designated the SEV-3XAR. This variant caught the Army's attention, leading to a contract for 30 BT-8 basic trainers. But Seversky and Kartveli had bigger ambitions. They wanted to build fighters. The opportunity came in 1935, when the Army Air Corps announced a competition for a new single-seat pursuit aircraft. Seversky submitted a derivative of the SEV-3 design, designated the SEV-1XP. Despite mechanical problems during the fly-off, the aircraft's potential was clear. On June 16, 1936, the Seversky entry was selected as the winner, beating the Curtiss Model 75 Hawk. The resulting production order for 77 P-35 fighters marked Seversky's entry into military aviation. More importantly for Kartveli, it provided his first opportunity to design a front-line combat aircraft. The P-35 was America's first all-metal monoplane, fighter with retractable landing gear and an enclosed cockpit. It incorporated the distinctive semi-elliptical wing planform that would appear on every subsequent Seversky and Republic fighter. But the P-35 also revealed fundamental limitations in pre-war fighter philosophy. Armed with only 2 machine guns and lacking armor protection, it represented the peacetime military's preference for speed over firepower, elegance over survival. Those priorities were about to change dramatically. By 1939, war was consuming Europe, and the lessons being learned were brutal. German fighters weren't just fast. They were heavily armed, well protected, and flown by pilots trained for aggressive combat rather than peacetime maneuvers. American fighter design would need to evolve rapidly or become irrelevant. That evolution began with a palace revolution at Seversky Aircraft. Alexander de Seversky's erratic business practices and controversial political statements had alienated investors and military officials. In October 1939, the company's board of directors removed him from control. The company was renamed Republic Aviation Corporation, with Wallace Kellett taking over as president and Kartveli assuming greater design authority. The timing was crucial. Within months, Republic would receive a request that would challenge every assumption about American fighter design. The Army Air Corps had been watching the air war over Europe with growing alarm. German fighters were proving superior to most Allied aircraft. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 could climb faster and fight harder than anything in the American inventory. The solution, Air Corps planners decided, was a new generation of fighters designed specifically for the coming war. They wanted speed, but also firepower. They wanted maneuverability, but also survivability. Most importantly, they wanted these characteristics in aircraft that could be produced in quantities that would overwhelm Axis. Manufacturing. In August 1939, the Air Corps approached Republic with a request for proposals for a lightweight, high-altitude interceptor. The specification called for maximum speed, minimal weight, and armament sufficient for bomber interception. Kartveli responded with the AP-10 design, a sleek fighter powered by an Allison V 1710 liquid-cooled engine and armed with 250 caliber machine guns mounted in the nose. The AP-10 was everything pre-war doctrine said a fighter should be: light, fast, and economical to produce. Maximum speed was estimated at 415 miles per hour, while gross weight was just 4,900 pounds. The Army Air Corps was impressed enough to order a prototype in November 1939, designated XP-47. But even as Kartveli refined his lightweight design, events in Europe were undermining its fundamental assumptions. The Battle of France in May 1940 demonstrated that speed alone was insufficient for survival in modern air combat. German fighters weren't just fast, they were aggressive, heavily armed, and capable of absorbing significant damage while continuing to fight. By early 1940, combat reports from European theatres painted a devastating picture. Allied fighters were being shot down at alarming rates. Pilots who survived described German aircraft that seemed nearly indestructible, armed with cannon that could destroy enemy fighters with brief bursts. The delicate interceptors, favoured by peacetime planners, were proving woefully inadequate for real combat. The crisis reached Republic aviation on a Tuesday morning in June 1940. Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Kelsey from Wright Field arrived at Farmingdale carrying classified combat reports from France and Britain. The documents he showed Kartveli contained detailed analyses of air combat over Europe, including gun camera footage and pilot debriefings that revealed the brutal reality of modern fighter warfare. German fighters weren't just shooting down Allied aircraft, they were demolishing them. The Messerschmitt Bf-109's cannon armament could destroy enemy fighters with hits that lighter machine guns would merely damage. More importantly, German fighters could absorb punishment that would disable or destroy lighter aircraft. The most sobering report came from squadron leader Douglas Bader of the Royal Air Force. His Spitfire squadron had engaged Bf-109 seconds over the English Channel in combat that lasted less than 3 minutes. 2 British fighters were shot down, both victims of brief cannon bursts that severed control cables and destroyed engines. The surviving Spitfires had scored hits on German aircraft that continued fighting despite visible damage. Kelsey was blunt with Kartveli. The Army Air Corps needed fighters that could match German performance in every category. Speed, firepower, and survivability were equally important. The delicate interceptors of peacetime doctrine were obsolete before they could be built. That afternoon, Kartveli sat in his office, reviewing the Army's new requirements. The specifications that had seemed reasonable 6 months earlier now appeared inadequate. The Air Corps wanted fighters capable of 400 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. They wanted armament of 6 or preferably 8 50-caliber machine guns. They wanted cockpit armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and fuel capacity of at least 315 gallons. Most importantly, they wanted these capabilities in aircraft designed for mass production. The war in Europe was demonstrating that quantity mattered as much as quality. Germany was producing fighters by the thousands. America would need to do the same. Kartveli understood immediately that his lightweight XP-47 design was doomed. The aircraft simply couldn't accommodate the Army's new requirements without fundamental redesign. The Allison engine lacked the power for the increased armament and armor. The airframe was too small for the required fuel capacity. The entire concept needed radical revision. That evening, Kartveli began sketching a new design that bore no resemblance to the rejected XP-47. Where the original had been light and delicate, the new aircraft would be massive and brutal. Where the original had prioritized speed over everything else, the new design would balance speed with firepower and survival. The breakthrough came when Kartveli abandoned conventional fighter philosophy entirely. Instead of trying to build the lightest aircraft possible, he decided to build the most effective one. If that meant doubling the weight, so be it. If it meant using the largest engine available, that was acceptable. If it meant creating a fighter larger than some bombers, that was the price of effectiveness. The engine selection drove every other design decision. Kartveli chose the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower. The R2800 was the most powerful air-cooled engine in production, but it was also enormous. Installing it in a fighter would require an airframe unlike anything previously built. The armament specification was equally revolutionary. 8 50-caliber machine guns would require wing modifications that added weight and complexity. Each gun needed ammunition storage, feeding mechanisms, and cooling systems. The combined weight of guns and ammunition would exceed 1,500 pounds, more than the entire gross weight of some pre-war fighters. But the most audacious element of Kartveli's new design was the turbocharger system. To achieve maximum performance at high altitude, the aircraft would incorporate a General Electric turbocharger mounted in the rear fuselage. Exhaust gases from the R2800 engine would drive the turbocharger through ducting that ran along the fuselage sides. Compressed air would return through additional ducting to an intercooler system before reaching the engine. The turbocharger installation was unprecedented in fighter design. The ducting alone weighed several hundred pounds and occupied significant internal volume. The system was complex, potentially unreliable, and guaranteed to increase maintenance requirements. but it would allow the aircraft to maintain full power at altitudes where other fighters lost effectiveness. On June 12, 1940, Kartveli submitted his revised AP-10 proposal to the Army Air Corps. The specifications seemed almost comical compared to contemporary fighters. Empty weight, 9,900 pounds. Gross weight, over 12,000 pounds. Length, nearly 35 feet. Wingspan, over 40 feet. The aircraft was massive by any standard. It weighed more than some twin-engine bombers. It was longer than many medium bombers. It required a propeller over 12 feet in diameter, which necessitated landing gear that telescoped to provide ground clearance. Colonel Kelsey reviewed the proposal with undisguised amazement. Kartveli had essentially designed a flying tank, armed like a destroyer and powered like a racing aircraft. The specifications seemed impossible, the weight excessive, the complexity overwhelming, but the performance projections were undeniable. Maximum speed, over 400 miles per hour at altitude. Service ceiling, over 40,000 feet. Range, over 800 miles with internal fuel. Armament, 850 caliber machine guns with 2,800 rounds of ammunition. More importantly, the aircraft would be virtually indestructible by contemporary standards. Armor plating around the cockpit would stop rifle-caliber bullets and shell fragments. Self-sealing fuel tanks would prevent fires from minor hits. The massive radial engine could absorb damage that would disable liquid-cooled engines. The Army Air Corps faced a decision that would influence the entire course of American fighter development. They could order conventional fighters based on peacetime doctrine, or they could gamble on Kartveli's revolutionary design. The choice seemed obvious in hindsight, but at the time it represented an enormous leap of faith. On September 6, 1940, the Air Corps ordered a prototype of Kartveli's monster fighter, designated XP-47B. 1 week later, they placed orders for 161 production P-47Bs and 602 P-47Cs, representing a total contract value of over $56 million. The gamble had paid off before the first aircraft was even built, but building Kartveli's design would prove even more challenging than conceiving it. The XP-47B would test every assumption about what was possible in fighter design, pushing American engineering and manufacturing to their limits. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale factory began preparing for production of an aircraft unlike anything they had previously built. The tooling requirements alone were staggering. The massive wing sections would require new jigs and fixtures. The complex turbocharger installation would demand precision manufacturing techniques. The armament system would need specialized assembly procedures. Kartveli spent the autumn of 1940 refining his design and solving the countless engineering problems that emerged during detailed design work. The turbocharger ducting required exotic materials and complex shapes. The landing gear mechanism needed to be both robust enough to support 12,000 pounds and sophisticated enough to telescope during extension. The propeller installation presented unique challenges. The R-2800 engine's power demanded a four-bladed constant-speed propeller over 12 feet in diameter. The propeller's size required landing gear tall enough to provide ground clearance, but the gear had to retract into wing spaces already occupied by fuel tanks, ammunition storage, and gun installations. Kartveli's solution was characteristic of his engineering philosophy. Instead of compromising any single requirement, he increased the aircraft's size until all requirements could be met. The wings grew larger to accommodate everything needed. The fuselage lengthened to house the turbocharger system. The vertical stabilizer enlarged to provide adequate control authority for the massive aircraft. By December 1940, the XP-47B design was complete. The aircraft that emerged from Kartveli's calculations bore no resemblance to conventional fighter aircraft. It was a giant among fighters, a bruiser designed for brutal combat rather than elegant maneuvers. Construction of the prototype began in January 1941 at Republic's Farmingdale facility. The first major assembly was the wing center section, a massive structure designed to house 450 caliber machine guns, their ammunition, and the main landing gear. The complexity was immediately apparent. Each wing contained over 3,000 individual parts, more than many complete aircraft. The fuselage assembly presented even greater challenges. The turbocharger installation required precise alignment of ducting that ran nearly the entire length of the aircraft. The exhaust ducting had to withstand temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Fahrenheit while maintaining structural integrity. The intake ducting needed to deliver pressurized air without restriction while surviving combat damage. Engine installation required specialists from Pratt and Whitney to ensure proper integration with the turbocharger system. The R-2800 double Wasp was mounted in a broad cowling that admitted cooling air through a distinctive horse collar opening. The cowling design was crucial to engine cooling, but it also contributed to the aircraft's massive frontal area. By March 1941, the XP-47B was nearing completion. Republic test pilot Lowry Brabham conducted taxi tests that revealed the aircraft's enormous ground presence. The Thunderbolt dwarfed every other fighter on the field. Mechanics needed ladders to reach the cockpit. Ground crews required special equipment to service the aircraft. But the most revealing test came when Brabham attempted to assess the aircraft's handling characteristics during high-speed taxi runs. The XP-47B accelerated like no fighter he had previously flown. The massive R-2800 engine delivered power that seemed almost excessive for a single-seat aircraft. Control response was heavy but positive, suggesting an aircraft designed for stability rather than quick maneuvering. On May 6, 1941, exactly 8 months after the Army had ordered the prototype, Lowry Brabham climbed into the XP-47B's cockpit for its maiden flight. The aircraft that lifted off from Farmingdale that morning would prove to be one of the most significant fighters in aviation history, but its success was far from assured. Initial flight tests revealed both the promise and the problems of Kartveli's revolutionary design. The XP-47B was undeniably fast, achieving speeds over 400 miles per hour at altitude, but it was also undeniably heavy, requiring long takeoff runs and careful attention to weight and balance. More concerning were the teething problems that emerged during the test program. The turbocharger system proved temperamental, requiring constant adjustment and frequent maintenance. The engine installation generated vibrations that affected instruments and radio equipment. The aircraft's size made it difficult to maneuver in tight quarters, limiting its suitability for small airfields. But the fundamental performance was impressive enough to silence most critics. When the XP-47B achieved 412 miles per hour at 25,800 feet, it became clear that Kartveli had created something extraordinary. The rejected lightweight fighter had evolved into the fastest fighter in the American inventory. The early test flights revealed a fundamental truth about Kartveli's design. The XP-47B was not an interceptor in the traditional sense. It was something entirely new in fighter aviation, IISL, a heavyweight bruiser designed to dominate through firepower and survivability rather than nimble maneuvering. This realization would prove crucial as America entered the war and discovered exactly what kind of fighter was needed for total victory. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. As Japanese bombs fell on the Pacific Fleet, the XP-47B was still undergoing flight testing at Republic's Farmingdale facility. The surprise attack transformed everything. America was at war, and the luxury of leisurely development schedules had vanished overnight. Republic aviation faced enormous pressure to accelerate Thunderbolt production, while simultaneously solving the technical problems that plagued the prototype. The first production, P-47B Thunderbolts, began rolling off the assembly line in March 1942, but significant challenges remained. Early aircraft suffered from engine problems, radio interference from the turbocharger system, and landing gear malfunctions. More seriously, the aircraft's rate of climb was disappointing, and its range was inadequate for escort missions. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding officer of the 56th Fighter Group, received the first operational P-47Bs in January 1943. Zemke was a veteran pilot with extensive experience in various fighter types, but nothing had prepared him for the Thunderbolt. The aircraft was simply massive compared to anything he had previously flown. Zemke's initial assessment was mixed. The P-47 was undeniably fast in level flight and a stable gun platform, but it climbed like a freight train and turned like a truck. Worse, Its combat radius was barely 300 miles, insufficient for escorting bombers deep into German territory. The aircraft seemed better suited for coastal defense than offensive operations, but Zemke also recognized qualities that would prove crucial in combat. The P-47's cockpit was spacious and comfortable, reducing pilot fatigue during long missions. The aircraft's size provided excellent stability for gunnery, and its 850 caliber machine guns delivered devastating firepower. Most importantly, the massive radial engine and heavy construction suggested exceptional survivability. The 56th Fighter Group deployed to England in January 1943, followed by the 78th and 353rd Fighter Groups. Initial combat operations revealed both the Thunderbolt's strengths and its limitations. German pilots quickly learned that the P-47 could not match the Messerschmitt Bf 109's climbing ability or turning performance. But they also discovered that the American fighter was nearly indestructible. Lieutenant Francis Gabreski of the 56th Fighter Group scored the P-47's first aerial victory on April 15, 1943, shooting down a Focke-Wulf 190 over the Pas-de-Calais. But the real revelation came when damaged Thunderbolts began returning to base with battle damage that would have destroyed other fighters. Captain Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group provided the most dramatic example. On June 26, 1943, Johnson's P-47 was attacked by German fighters over France. Cannon shells shattered his canopy, destroyed his radio, and punctured his fuel tanks. The massive radial engine absorbed multiple hits but continued running. Johnson flew his damaged Thunderbolt across the English Channel and landed safely at his home base. Johnson's survival illustrated Kartveli's design philosophy perfectly. The rejected lightweight fighter would have been destroyed by damage the Thunderbolt absorbed routinely. The additional weight that critics had called excessive was actually armor and structural redundancy that saved lives. By autumn 1943, P-47 groups were establishing impressive combat records. The 56th Fighter Group, led by Colonel Zemke, became the highest-scoring P-47 unit in the European theatre. Major Robert Johnson and Captain Francis Gabreski emerged as leading aces, demonstrating that the Thunderbolt could compete with German fighters despite its weight disadvantage. But the P-47's greatest strength was discovered almost by accident. During return flights from bomber escort missions, Thunderbolt pilots began attacking targets of opportunity on the ground. German airfields, supply trains, and motor convoys proved vulnerable to the P-47's 8 machine guns and growing bomb-carrying capability. The transformation from pure fighter to fighter-bomber began with improvised tactics. Pilots discovered that the Thunderbolt's diving speed was exceptional, allowing steep attack angles that improved accuracy while reducing exposure to ground fire. The aircraft's rugged construction absorbed ground fire that would disable lighter fighters. Republic Aviation responded by developing bomb racks and rocket launchers for the P-47. By late 1943, Thunderbolts were carrying 500-pound bombs on short-range missions. The aircraft that had been rejected as too heavy for fighter duties was proving ideal for ground attack operations. The P-47's effectiveness as a fighter bomber reached its peak during the preparations for D-Day. From April through June 1944, Thunderbolt groups systematically destroyed German transportation networks in France. Locomotives, bridges, supply convoys, and communication centers fell victim to coordinated attacks that demonstrated the aircraft's versatility. Colonel Zemke's 56th Fighter Group typified the P-47's evolution. Originally trained for air-to-air combat, the group's pilots became expert ground attackers while maintaining their fighter capabilities. A single mission might include bomber escort, fighter sweeps, and ground attack, with pilots switching roles seamlessly as circumstances required. The statistics were remarkable. P-47 groups destroyed over 3,000 German aircraft in air-to-air combat during the war, but they also demolished 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 600 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. The rejected fighter had become America's premier ground attack aircraft. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The human cost of Kartveli's design decisions became apparent through pilot testimonials. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts of the 362nd Fighter Group described his P-47 as the most forgiving aircraft I ever flew. The spacious cockpit reduced fatigue during 4-hour missions. The stable platform improved gunnery accuracy. Most importantly, the aircraft's survivability brought pilots home alive. Captain Walker Mahurin of the 56th Fighter Group survived multiple encounters that would have been fatal in lighter fighters. During one mission over Germany, his P-47 absorbed cannon fire that destroyed the instrument panel, punctured the fuel tank, and damaged the engine. The massive radial continued running long enough for Mahurin to reach friendly territory and execute a successful forced landing. The contrast with German fighter philosophy was striking. German aircraft emphasized performance over protection, resulting in fighters that were fast and maneuverable but vulnerable to damage. American pilots in P-47 seconds could accept hits that would destroy German aircraft while continuing their missions. The production numbers told the story of institutional vindication. Republic Aviation built 15,686 P-47 Thunderbolts during the war, making it the most produced American fighter. The aircraft that had seemed impossibly large in 1940 was being manufactured at rates that would have been inconceivable before the war. Alexander Kartveli's vindication came through recognition from the pilots who flew his creation. Colonel Zemke wrote that the P-47 could absorb more punishment than any fighter ever built. Major Johnson called it the fighter that brought me home. Captain Gabreski described it as the most effective fighter bomber of the war. The technical innovations pioneered in the P-47 influenced fighter design for decades. The turbocharger installation became standard for high-altitude fighters. The emphasis on pilot protection established principles that guided post-war design. The integration of air-to-air and air-to-ground capabilities defined the modern fighter-bomber concept, but perhaps the most significant legacy was institutional. Kartveli's experience demonstrated that radical innovation often requires rejecting conventional wisdom. The Army Air Corps' willingness to abandon their lightweight fighter specification in favor of an untested design philosophy proved crucial to American air superiority. The transformation from rejected concept to combat legend took exactly 4 years. In June 1940, Kartveli's lightweight XP-47 was dismissed as inadequate. By June 1944, P-47 Thunderbolts were spearheading the air campaign that made D-Day possible. The rejected design had become the foundation of American tactical air power. The P-47's combat record in the Pacific Theater was equally impressive but different in character. The vast distances of Pacific warfare emphasized the aircraft's range and survivability over its ground attack capabilities. P-47 groups based in the Philippines and Ryukyu Islands flew long-range escort missions that demonstrated the aircraft's strategic value. The final vindication came during the closing months of the war. As American forces advanced toward Japan, P-47 seconds provided close air support for ground operations while maintaining air superiority over defended positions. The aircraft that had been conceived as a defensive interceptor was leading offensive operations thousands of miles from American territory. Production ended in November 1945 with the delivery of the last P-47 Newtons variant, but the aircraft's influence extended far beyond its wartime service. The design principles Kartveli established, AOP, prioritizing effectiveness over elegance, protection over performance, capability over convention, USA, became fundamental to American fighter development. The Republic F-84 Thunderjet incorporated many P-47 design elements, including the emphasis on structural strength and pilot protection. The F-105 Thunderchief continued the tradition of heavily armed fighter bombers, optimized for ground attack. Even modern aircraft like the A-10 Thunderbolt II reflect Kartveli's philosophy of building aircraft for mission effectiveness rather than theoretical performance. Alexander Kartveli continued designing aircraft for Republic Aviation until his retirement in 1975. His later designs included the F-84 family, the F-105 Thunderchief, and early concepts for what became the A-10. Throughout his career, he maintained the design philosophy established with the P-47, build aircraft that work, regardless of conventional limitations. The Georgian immigrant who had fled the Bolshevik Revolution became one of America's most influential aircraft designers. His willingness to reject the lightweight fighter specification in 1940 demonstrated the kind of institutional flexibility that proved crucial to American victory in World War II. The mathematical proof of Kartveli's success was written in stark statistics. Over 23,000 American pilots flew P-47 Thunderbolts in combat. The aircraft achieved a loss rate of less than 1% per sortie, exceptional by World War II standards. More importantly, it brought those pilots home alive at rates that validated every design decision Kartveli had made. The story of the rejected design becoming America's most feared fighter bomber illustrates fundamental principles about innovation and institutional adaptation. Sometimes the best solution requires abandoning established doctrine. Sometimes effectiveness matters more than efficiency. Sometimes the rejected proposal contains the seeds of revolutionary success. The P-47 Thunderbolt entered service as the heaviest single-engine fighter ever built and ended the war as one of the most successful aircraft in American military history. The rejected lightweight interceptor had evolved into something far more valuable, a fighter that could dominate any battlefield through sheer overwhelming capability. The legacy extended beyond the aircraft itself to the institutional lessons learned. The Army Air Corps' willingness to gamble on an untested design philosophy demonstrated the kind of flexibility that total war demanded. The decision to support Kartveli's revolutionary concept, despite its apparent disadvantages, proved crucial to American air superiority. In the final analysis, the P-47's success validated an approach to military procurement that prioritized capability over convention. The aircraft worked not despite its massive size and weight, but because of them. Every criticism leveled against Kartveli's design, too heavy, too complex, too expensive, was transformed into an operational advantage by the realities of combat. The pilots who flew the Thunderbolt understood this better than anyone. They nicknamed it the Jug for its milk jug silhouette, but they also called it the Unbreakable. They complained about its weight during taxi operations, then praised its stability during gunnery runs. They worried about its complexity during maintenance, then celebrated its reliability during combat. Captain Robert Johnson, who survived the war with 27 victories while flying P-47 seconds, perhaps summarized it best. The P-47 was never the prettiest fighter or the most maneuverable fighter, but it was the fighter that brought you home. When you were over enemy territory with German fighters trying to kill you, that mattered more than anything else. The transformation was complete. Alexander Kartveli's rejected lightweight fighter had become the symbol of American industrial might and tactical flexibility. The aircraft that seemed impossible in 1940 had proved indispensable by 1945. The rejected design had built America's most feared fighter bomber through the simple expedient of prioritizing what worked over what looked good on paper. The P-47 Thunderbolt flew its last combat mission on August 14, 1945, the day Japan announced surrender. In 5 years of development and production, Kartveli's revolutionary design had evolved from a rejected concept to the foundation of American tactical air power. The heavyweight fighter that critics called a dinosaur had become the predator that ruled the skies. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.